poultry industry, there are several things that we look at which then drive welfare. We start with the basics, and the basics are about the 5 fundamental freedoms around which animals are supposed to be looked after. Freedom number 1 is freedom from hunger and thirst, which essentially looks at how do you feed the chicken, what do you feed it with, how frequently. Realize that the way we feed an adult is different from the way we feed a young child. So the same applies to chicken. The feed that you give a day-old chick is different from the feed that you give a fully grown layer or a producing bird for that matter. Critical around feed is also water, and that's why it's freedom from hunger and thirst, because if you don't give good quality water, you then end up with a situation where the animal doesn't perform. The next critical thing is freedom from discomfort, which looks at the environment, the chicken house. Is it comfortable? Is it well ventilated? Does it have enough heat or sunlight? These are critical because if the animal is in a poorly ventilated chicken house, you end up with respiratory conditions, which then leads to a situation where it can't produce optimally. Air is very critical for us to be able to do certain things. The third one is freedom from pain, injury, and disease. And essentially, in this point, you're looking at disease control. And you realize that poultry production is one of the intensive farming systems, and around which globally we now know that there's a lot of pandemics coming from it, because it's a place where if you don't manage disease well, then it ends up in the food. Or if disease occurs, you have to treat, and when you treat that bird, you end up with antibiotic residues or antibiotic resistance cropping up at certain levels. So that's the next important thing. Then there's freedom to express natural behavior, which essentially is to say that the chicken must behave like a chicken irrespective of the production system you're on. If it's a chicken, if it's a bird is supposed to be able to scratch, to dust bathe, it's supposed to be able to perch, it's supposed to be able to flap its wings. That's the kind of freedom you're talking about. So the housing that you provide or the production system should be sensitive to that. That's why in chicken houses you put a certain amount of litter, which allows the chicken to scratch. That's why in good chicken houses you also put enrichment, which is things like perches where the bird can perch. You also allow it to have enough space so that it's able to walk around, stroll, and do exercise. All those contribute to the wellness of the bird. And last but not least is freedom from fear and distress. And essentially at that level, you are ensuring that the animal is not undergoing any situation that causes it to have stress, because a stressed animal then underproduces. People then are also discovering that animal welfare is linked to certain things. Animal welfare is linked to food safety. If you mistreat the animal at production level, you end up with an animal that might underperform, one, but two, it will also produce poor quality products. And above that, depending on how you treat it, if it's not fed well or fed with things like maize that is rotten, like happens in some of our situations, that will end up in your product. And as an organization, we've done some research, supermarket meat testing, that showed that meat at the supermarket was also ending up with contaminated with microorganisms that could cause problems to the consumers. So those are some of the things that the country is beginning to look at. Big integrated companies are beginning to realize that animal welfare is also important for trade.